Today on Skylines Summer Sessions, myself and Richard Hooper are joined by Maarten Goet. Among other things, Maarten is a Microsoft MVP and Microsoft Regional Director. Welcome, Maarten. It's great to have you on the show today. And today you're going to be...
Gregor and Richard.
Cool. Today you're going to be talking to us about Azure Sentinel. So to kick things off, Maarten, tell us a bit about yourself and the job that you do.
Well, I lead the enterprise security division at Wortel, and we provide managed services and consulting services around the Microsoft technology. My role is really getting the technology right and the promises we do to the customer. And like you said, I'm a Microsoft MVP as well, and focus on everything Microsoft tech.
Cool.
Sounds good. So as you're talking about Azure Sentinel, my question would be, we have Azure Security Center already. Why do we need Azure Sentinel?
Well, you could think of Azure Sentinel as being the one place to aggregate all of those signals, because you'll be getting signals from Azure Security Center, potentially maybe from Defender, ATP, maybe have Cloud App Security deployed and others. And these products are really doing a good job in their respective area, but they produce signals, and those alerts and signals need to be combined, I guess, to paint the full picture. Now, with Azure Security Center really being workload protection among a couple of other things, and it is not a SIM, you could say that Azure Sentinel is a SIM that would complement Azure Security Center in that scenario.
Okay, great. Maarten, do you see any of your customers using at Wortel using Azure Sentinel? What's the kind of uptake of people using Azure Sentinel?
Yeah, we see that quite a bit. Actually, since last year when it became available, we see a huge interest in Azure Sentinel, often from going from what is it, what can it do, all the way to can it replace our current SIM, or if they don't have any SIM today, they'll start new. But we see quite an uptake because it combines well with the workloads you have in Azure and in 365. So we see a lot of customer demand, and some projects are early stage, some have already moved over and are actually using it in production.
Nice.
That sounds cool. So you mentioned that it integrates with other systems. Can I sort of integrate it with my on-premises existing tools, or what can I integrate with it?
Yeah, so Azure Sentinel is built on top of log analytics. So anything you can ingest into log analytics will surely work in Azure Sentinel. Now, to help you assist with that, there are connectors out of the box. So you can connect your cloud services quite easily. There are generic connectors like getting syslog information in, or events, or custom other data you might need. But certainly if you have specific systems, my colleague blogged, for instance, about getting PostgreSQL data into Azure Sentinel. Those are things you can do relatively easily. And for current tools and ingestion methods like Logstash and other things that are quite known in the cybersecurity area, these work well with Azure Sentinel as well. So there is a good way to combine all of those systems into Azure Sentinel.
Nice.
Yep. So, Maarten, I believe you've got some slides for us to cover. Can I go over Azure Sentinel? Is that right?
Yeah, I'd like to take you through an introduction, a one-on-one on what Azure Sentinel is, because like you said, Richard, there's a lot of confusion on, I have Azure Security Center, do I still need Azure Sentinel? If I'm big or small as a company, can I still use Azure Sentinel? So what I'll do is I'll share out my screen. Okay, I'll take you through a quick tour of Azure Sentinel, because like you said, Richard, there's a lot of confusion on if I have Azure Security Center, do I still need Sentinel? If I'm a company of 100 users, can I still use this, or is this targeted against bigger enterprises? So here's, I guess, the hitchhiker's guide to Azure Sentinel. So introduction is already done. Thank you for that. Before we dive into Azure Sentinel, I'd like to really make sure we're on the same page. And what we see today is that there is a new world to defend, where we had a lot of stuff on premises, our servers, our networking equipment, our applications, our Forest and Active Directory. We see that in that era, it helped to just do it all network-based, put firewalls in and lock down our network from a network perspective. With the cloud, we have different entry points. Each of these servers might have a management API, they might have ports exposed to the internet, and there's really a new way needed to defend this world where there are way more touch points on how to communicate between apps and with the internet. And where we defended things like a server, a domain admin, the password hashes, maybe the private IPs and such on premises, we see that in the cloud, it's really about services, about subscriptions, subscription admin, the credentials, public IPs often that gets exposed, network security groups and management APIs. So we still need to make sure we defend on premises, but once we move more and more into the cloud, it makes a lot of sense to also pivot the way we look at cloud defense and the things needed there. Now, traditional SIEMs require a lot of infrastructure. Often you had servers, you had storage. On top of that, you ran SIEM software and then you would ingest your data. And that infrastructure required quite a bit of maintenance to set it up, to maintain it going forward. You'd had to collect all the data, which was in and by itself relatively hard, because how would you connect an Office 365 system to your on-prem SIEM? And then normalizing the data so that we understand this field is about the username, whether it's from connector A or connector B, is also quite a daunting task. And you get a lot of signals from various systems, from various vendors. And it's our job in a traditional SIEM to make sense of this all. And there are a lot of vendors often in one environment. Maybe one vendor for antivirus, maybe there's one vendor for the network, there's a vendor you use maybe for virtualization, etc. So there's a lot of disconnected products that you need to connect back together to really paint one picture. And like we just saw in the previous slide, defending the cloud requires a different skill and tool set altogether. So this is where Microsoft came with Azure Sentinel late last year. Now, Azure Sentinel is a service you can just use from Microsoft Azure. It's a cloud-native SIEM. It uses the Microsoft Azure cloud, so in essence, it had almost limitless cloud speed and scale. And the speed is important because once you run things like machine learning models, and we'll talk about that in a second, you will need the compute for a brief moment, which is hard to achieve on premises. And of course, you might need scale depending on the number of events you're ingesting and the retention period you might have. Now, it has some machine learning built in. We'll talk about Azure Sentinel Fusion in a second, but some of these machine learning models that you find also in other products evolve into AI in Azure Sentinel. Easy integration for certainly the Microsoft products, but let's have a look in a slide where we also see that it integrates with some of the competing products. And of course, being at the cloud service, you just pay for what you use. You specifically pay for storage and for the retention times that you use beyond the 30 days you get out of the box. Now it's finally general available. You need 2,079 disks. No, I'm just kidding. This is just to illustrate the fact that it is now available. A lot of regions have the service scaled out and it's ready for you to use in your subscriptions. Now, and the question you raised, Richard, as well, is like, if I have Security Center today, do I still need Azure Sentinel? And certainly it's yes, because ASC focuses on workload protection and a couple of other things. And with Azure Sentinel, we take that as one of the inputs, one of the sources for signals that will paint our picture for the things happening in our environment. So you will likely use them together. Now, from an architectural standpoint, it's relatively easy. You're running it in Microsoft Azure, so everything you know and love there with Azure AD and the platform is available to you. You use a log analytics workspace. You can create a new one specifically for Azure Sentinel or you can reuse and repurpose a current log analytics workspace. Really depends on your requirements. I've wrote quite a lengthy blog on some considerations, but that would be a webcast by itself to understand whether you would choose a current one or a new one. And then you enable Azure Sentinel as a feature, you could say, on top of that log analytics workspace. And that has the Kusto query language that you might already have seen in other places in Azure, or Defender ATP, which gives you then the ability to hunt at scale, create alerts at scale, and quite easily work with that big data. Now, if you've not used Kusto yet, I encourage you to have a look at Pluralsight. There is a guy called Robert Kane that created a course called Kusto Query Language from scratch. And you can use 3.5 hours of content to really make sure you understand KQL and do some practices. Now, once you enable Azure Sentinel, it's like an empty workspace. We still need to feed it with data, and that's where the connectors and the integrations come in. There are, of course, a lot of Microsoft-based connectors. You can just connect your Azure AD, Identity Protection, Security Center, and a lot of the other things. But there are also connectors for AWS, for your networking equipment, and there's just a handful of vendors mentioned here, and there's way more in the product. We can connect to Symantec and other vendors, so really getting your data in is done through connectors, and there are, like we said in the beginning, generic connectors. So if you have something that talks syslog or another ingestion method for log analytics, that's currently the way to get it into Azure Sentinel. That will allow you to really build a single pane of glass. And that's very important, because the last thing you want to do is have 5 or 6 systems that you have your alerts and signals coming into, and then you as a human trying to figure out if there's one bigger story happening. Other than that, it's really just assisting you to make sure that you have one place to combine and go from alerts into incidents. Now, these incidents, I would say, I would call often use cases. Use cases are combining signals into one bigger story. So let's take this example, and let's say we've connected Azure AD Identity Protection that gives us the alert of an unusual login from a certain country where you don't have employees, and from which you might know that people are not on vacation at this point. And you feed that Azure AD alert into Azure Sentinel. You might have your networking equipment connected that at around the same time gives you the fact that this activity was done from a Tor exit, an anonymous IP, which of course then raises even more suspicion. The third signal you might be getting in if you connect a Defender ATP a couple of minutes later is where you find an execution of a suspicious PowerShell script, which is not normal behavior for a workstation or an end user. And let's say you connected Office ATP or Cloud App Security, and you find that in your environment, an Office 365 inbox forwarding rule was created a couple of minutes later. And combining these signals will really give us the information that there might be potential data exfiltration and some attack happening. And it's relatively hard to do if you have 4 separate products, 4 separate consoles. So this really helps you to narrow it down and see the bigger story happening altogether. This is an example of how that could look like: a compromised account leading to Office 365 mailbox exfiltration. And the alert description then also gives you the information about the user, the mailbox. And from here, you can go hunting through the various alerts and the various entities that were involved in this potential attack. Now, that hunting is a skill, an art and a science, I would say. There is some techniques to understanding what data to look at, and also to understand what am I now seeing here. And the art is really being able to apply it for the situation that you come across. But if you take the humans out of the equation, there is potential to do some automatic advanced hunting. So let's take this scenario where you connected Azure Sentinel to Defender ATP. You might have a threat intelligence feed from your networking equipment, or maybe from your SOC provider, or from MISP, one of the open sources. And maybe you want to use Azure Logic apps to make this an automatic scenario. So the scenario is the CERT publishes a new indicator of compromise, let's say a specific IP address based on their threat intelligence, and you ingest that into Azure Sentinel. And the SOC wants to know if endpoints connected to that IP in the past 30 days. And if they indeed connected, then that raises suspicion, and you probably want to isolate the endpoint and start following up with the response team to see if the user was compromised or the machine was compromised. So what you do is we take a playbook, an Azure Logic app, we ingest the new IOC into Azure Sentinel using the Graph API. Let's say that we take that information and query machines from Defender ATP to see if there was any communication happening from any of your endpoints in your network to that IP, and if so, remediate it by isolating the machine, and then, for instance, sending an email or creating a ticket in ServiceNow to make sure that the response team starts acting. Well, those are things you can do relatively easy in Azure Logic apps, which are called playbooks in the context of Azure Sentinel. And here's also, for instance, an example of a incident happening and then something that you can follow up by using an automatic playbook. So I would say that these are a better together scenario. You can still use Azure Sentinel in and by itself, but once you start connecting some of the other properties like Office ATP, Azure Identity Protection, Defender and such, you really get all of these signals, and then you can use Azure Sentinel as one place to rule them all, to get one bigger picture and use it as an orchestration or response platform, I would say. And it has easy to use graphical user interfaces, so you can just dive into an alert, right click and click on investigate, and then you're really helped to understand what entities are involved in this potential attack, when did it happen, what user, and maybe start using this as one of your use case platforms. So this is when Forrester and some of the independent companies also say, make no mistake, Microsoft is a security company now, and we see that quite a bit. So yeah, that's what I would say, Gregor and Robert, is where we see is Azure Sentinel involved.
Very nice demo, Maarten. Yeah, it looks really impressive. Very powerful tooling. Very good. So, Maarten, just for our viewers, where can they go and learn a little bit more about Azure Sentinel? Is there any kind of training or Microsoft Learn courses or anything like that that they can go and learn and play with this?
Well, there is quite a bit. I would say Microsoft has a GitHub repository themselves on github.com/Azure/Azure-Sentinel. Where there are a lot of resources you can take for hunting or alert rules and such. If you're looking for training, you can just Google on becoming an Azure Sentinel Ninja, because Ofer, one of the PMs, published quite a lengthy blog with a lot of resources there. It's a great starting point, I would say, for anybody who wants to start with Sentinel. There's blogs like myself on Twitter. There's a lot of tweets and the Pluralsight course. It's actually quite well to understand KQL.
Sure.
Nice. So I was going to ask about incidents and alerts, but you sort of smashed that out of the park with your nice slide. So one question I have would be about role-based access control. Can you actually do that so you can get your SOC team only access to, say, the Sentinel in the Azure portal rather than all the other bits?
Yeah, certainly. That's certainly possible. There are a couple of moving parts you need to have a look at, because first of all, your identity is Azure AD based. And like maybe a lot of the viewers know, is that with privileged identity management, you could control who can use which role and when. Now there's also the log analytics workspace. That's something where you can control rights and access to. And they actually released a really nice feature. Now you can do all the way down to table level. So you can even specify that personal identifiable data in a certain table cannot be accessed by anyone anymore, but maybe only the response team. And there's some roles that Azure Sentinel has itself that you can use. So yeah, we see actually bigger companies like banks. I was involved with the project last year that deployed it at scale and actually are using RBAC to control who accesses the data.
Nice, nice. So Maarten, just what you touched on there, is Azure Sentinel, is it kind of aimed at the enterprise companies, or is it for everyone? Is it expensive, basically?
Well, the cost is you pay for storage and retention. So if you're a small company, you will likely ingest less data and it's quite affordable. If you're a big enterprise with tens of thousands of users, yeah, your spending is going to be quite a bit higher, but certainly different than a lot of the traditional SIEMs where you're spending big money on the infrastructure, on the software, and often also like events per second, even if where you pay for. So I think it's quite affordable, and I would say from tens, maybe 100 user, all the way up to the bigger enterprises. And I would say it depends on your maturity level. If you just want to have endpoint protection and work off of the alerts there, that's fine. If you see that you can handle combining alerts and then following them up, then Azure Sentinel is perfectly fine. But it needs time, love, and dedication. So you will need a mature dedication and dedicated organization.
So I think we got some fun questions for you now. So you're the founder of Experts Live, I believe. So could you tell us a bit more about what Experts Live is and how you got started with it?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. Yeah, so I founded it in 2009 already, when it started as a meetup, because we saw that in our specific area in Holland there wasn't enough focus on the Microsoft technology as far as user groups went. And we went with meetups, but fast forward 11 years, it's now a big global initiative and a non-profit organization even. And each country has its own chapter and organizers who voluntarily organize conferences around Microsoft technology and let community speakers share their knowledge with others. Before the corona happened, our members organized more than 16 events in 4 continents, reaching over 10,000 people a year. So big shout out for Brenda Kager, Isadora Kantanic and others for making this happen. And now we're trying to reinvent what Experts Live should be, because we don't see this year any big 1,000+ events happening. But our core mission is to share Microsoft expertise and experience.
Oh yeah, I attended Experts Live Europe for the first time last year, and it was quite easily the best conference I've been at. So yeah, hats off to Izzy and all the organisers for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Great team over there in Switzerland that's doing that job. Really awesome.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Right, last question that we've got. So I did a little bit of digging on yourself, and I see that you've been to Harvard Business School. So that's pretty cool. Can you tell us what you did there and what you were studying?
Yeah, I took 2 courses. I had an online one that was about cybersecurity, and it was called Managing Risk in the Information Age. And I took that one because I wanted to understand more about the non-technical implications of cybersecurity. So how does a boardroom look at risk, and how should we value that, and how should we make sure the technology plays well with that strategy. And the second one was on the Boston campus, a management and leadership course, which I found to be very inspiring because it was on the historic campus, learning from peers and from professors that almost invented the models. So that was really to just develop myself. And yeah, like you know, it's like MVP is a really valuable title, but it's technology and based. It's what you know about the technology and how you share it with the community. And these courses are really about developing yourself and getting a broader picture for your work area. So I loved it. I would recommend it to anybody, but it is not cheap.
Yeah, I'll give that a miss, I think.
Yeah, maybe one day.
Yeah, maybe one day.
Yeah.
Okay, so Maarten, thanks for your time as always. It's been a pleasure chatting. It's always good to catch up with you. So myself and Richard are going to go away and probably give Azure Sentinel a good try and go and read up on custom query language. It's easy for me to say. So thanks for your time. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Gregor. Thank you, Richard, and see you next time.
Cheers. Thank you.